Today, I want to talk about exposure and what does 18% gray really mean? Hi everyone, I hope everyone had a fantastic Thanksgiving. So today I want to talk about exposure. And the goal of this video is to help you understand how your camera sees light and how when your light is hitting a subject, how it determines how much or how little light is going to be let into the camera through the lens and into the sensor, onto the sensor, and then an image taken. Okay, so that's kind of what our goal is today, is to try to understand that and understand what all this 18% gray means. When I say how your camera determines how much light to let in or not let in, exposure and so forth, this means I'm referring to when you are on any kind of auto mode, whether that be auto, program, aperture priority, shutter priority, even any of like sports mode, portrait mode, things like that. The camera is determining how much light to let in, okay, through its programming, okay? So when you're on auto mode, you have pretty much no control over the camera settings. What's the camera doing when it goes and takes a photograph? First, it looks at your subject and it looks at the light hitting your subject. And it tries to determine how much light is actually hitting your subject. Then it wants to determine how much light or how little light to let into the camera, into the lens, and hitting the sensor to get a proper exposure. The goal is to make sure it doesn't have too little light, but it also doesn't want too much light. It wants that perfect exposure of just enough light. So here's an example. Here is an image of a subject that is properly exposed. Then here it is overly exposed, and then here it is underexposed. How does this happen? How does the camera know how to do that? Your camera has a sophisticated computer inside of here, all right? And it sees the world in a mid-tone gray. And this is where 18% gray is coming from. So when you're photographing something, your camera doesn't realize what it is you're taking a photo of. You could be taking a picture of a sunset. You could be taking a picture of a bottle of wine. You could be taking a picture of your children, right? But your camera doesn't know that. All it knows is how much light is hitting your subject, and then it determines how to add enough light or take away light to get that mid-tone gray, otherwise known as 18% gray. To your camera, 18% gray equals perfect exposure. So I know this sounds really confusing, and it was really confusing for me at first as well, because we're talking about gray, it only sees in gray, but I'm shooting everything in color. I don't understand. So let me kind of explain a little bit more about how this happens. So here you are, you have your camera, right? And you're getting ready to take your shot and you're setting up your shot. Now remember, this is based on auto modes. Any of the auto modes, anything but manual, this is what's happening. Okay, so you're setting up your camera, right? And as you're setting it up, the light meter inside this camera is looking at your subject, determining the amount of light on that subject, and it's converting the image to black and white. And then it's saying, based on the light that's hitting your image, how much light or how little light should I be allowing into the lens to hit the sensor to make my overall image an overall tone of gray 18%. Ultimate goal is to make it 18%, which the camera believes is correct exposure. Okay, so you're setting like this, right? You've got your camera setting up, it's converting to black and white, it's making its calculations. You go to take the picture, it converts it back to color before it hits the image, the sensor, and you get your final image. And that's how it determines based on the 18% gray, because it's looking at a black and white image when it's making the calculations and then converting it back to color. What do I mean by overall tone? I keep saying overall tone, right? What do I mean by that? It's the average of all the tone in an image. So let me show you an example of what I mean. Here's our picture that I showed you earlier of the white candle that's properly exposed. If you convert this to black and white, okay, and you blur the image, it'll look like this. And you'll see there's an overall amount of tone in this. There's some darks up in the corner, goes to lights and then darks. So it's the average of all of these tones taken together to make the overall tone. And that overall tone for a camera to be perfectly exposed, it should be 18% gray. So here's the rub. Okay, the camera wants everything to be 18% gray for proper exposure. Whether we want it to be or not, it's going to set at that exposure. So let's go back to our white candle picture again. Here you see we have a white candle. Now, the camera sees it as a light gray, but in its camera's mind, it needs to be 18% gray to be properly exposed. So it underexposes the photo to make it go from that light gray to a darker gray, which the camera believes is properly exposed. But although we may not want that, we may want it to stay in that lighter area for the exposure. But whether we want it or not, because we're shooting in auto mode, that's what's happening. Now let's look at a different direction. Here is a black remote with a black background. The camera's going to look at the light hitting this black remote with a black background, and it's going to register it a very dark gray. Well, that is darker than 18% gray. So what's it going to do? That's right, it's going to overexpose the image because in its camera's mind, that dark gray is underexposed. It needs to move it to a lighter gray, which is the 18% gray, and get a quote unquote proper exposure. That makes the remote look gray instead of black. So really, it may be a proper exposure to the camera, but not necessarily to us, especially if we want a remote that's black and not gray. So how do I get the camera to stop doing this? How do I get the camera to stop under and overexposing my photos so that they look the way that I want them to? The answer is manual mode. Okay, I know. Nope. I don't want anything to do with manual mode. Please go away, leave me alone. I don't want anything to do with it. I get it. I totally get it. I was scared of manual mode too, but it's actually not as hard as you might think. You have to understand some concepts, but once you understand the relation of only three things, just three things, you understand that relationship, manual mode is actually easier than auto modes because you get the photo exactly the way that you want. So, and the other thing too is once you go to manual mode, you will find it really hard to go back to your auto modes. Now that I've been shooting manual mode, I've been shooting manual mode for years. I don't even know how long now. And I have tried to go back to like say a shutter priority because I'm like, oh, it'll probably just be easier because there's so much going on. But in the long run, I end up going back to manual almost every single time because it's just so frustrating to not get what I want because in manual mode, I have control of everything on the camera. So what three things do you need to understand to be able to understand manual mode and get your exposures the way that you want them and not the way the camera wants? Three things: aperture, shutter, and ISO. That is it. You understand those three concepts, how they work together in unison, bouncing off of one another in order to make a proper exposure, you've got manual mode down. And I promise you, it's not that hard. But the purpose of these videos is not to just throw you into manual mode to go, here, figure it out. I want to help you wean yourself off of auto mode and onto manual mode. That's how I did it. And then one day I kind of had the bits and pieces of the parts of manual mode kind of together, but didn't still quite understand it. Then I saw one video by a man by the name of Sean Tucker, and he did the triangle where he had ISO, aperture, and shutter, however he did it. But anyway, he used the triangle to explain the relationship between the three, and that's when the light bulb went off for me. But I don't think if I didn't understand what those three aspects of the camera really are, what they really do, that video probably wouldn't have meant anything to me. Welcome to check it out if you want to. Sean Tucker is his name. But until you have been in those modes, working with them and understanding what all of that really means when it comes to exposure, it may not make a lot of sense. But once we get you introduced to those features later down the road, it probably will. So for the meantime, the purpose of these videos is to try to help you to learn what aperture, shutter, ISO, what all of that means, to get you off of those auto modes and onto the manual modes. And then we'll start talking about composition and depth of field and motion and all of that stuff to make your pictures even better, okay? So for now, we're just focusing on what does it mean, what's the camera doing to get proper exposure, and that wants 18% gray for that overall tone, because in its mind, that's what's properly exposed. So if you're getting under and overexposed photographs, that is why. I hope that you found this video helpful, and I hope you have a better understanding now of how your camera is setting that exposure when you're in auto modes, no matter what the auto mode is. And if you're seeing your photos are under or overexposed, now you know why. And you understand what 18% gray really means. When they say, oh, you need to use 18% gray, now you understand why. But I want to emphasize the fact that if you're not interested in learning manual, or you're just not ready to go to manual and you want to stay on aperture, I am by no means saying you are any lesser a photographer if you're not on manual mode. That's not the truth at all. There are plenty of photographs out there being taken on aperture priority and shutter priority. I did quite a few myself for years, and I was a professional photographer shooting weddings on aperture and shutter. But my frustration was I didn't have the control that I needed, and I couldn't get the results that I truly wanted on a program mode or an auto mode like I can with manual. So if you want to learn to eventually get off of the auto modes and get to manual and have control of your camera, that's what this channel is about. But this channel is also about helping those that don't want to get off manual. They just want to learn how to take better photographs. And I'm here to help you with that too. So whatever your goals are in regards to your photography, come back next week. I'll have another video for you, and slowly but surely, we will have what you need to improve your photography and get better. And that's my ultimate goal, is for you to go take pictures that you love and have fun doing it. So until next time, I will see you later. Bye. Oh, wait, I forgot. Hey, be sure to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and make sure you like this video if it was helpful for you. I really would love to have the likes and the subscriptions to show YouTube that I'm actually giving quality content. I hope I'm giving quality content. I'm trying to give quality content. Anyway, make sure you like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, make sure you hit the notification bell so that you get notified every time I put a video up, and I'll see you next week. Bye!